First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's an absolute pleasure to be in front of so many amazing minds, and I'm already truly inspired, so as far as I'm concerned, I can go home now. But I guess I'll share my story with you. My name is Marcus Neustetter. I'm an artist, activist, I guess all-around producer based in Johannesburg, South Africa. And while I was building crazy installations, using the internet, using multimedia projections and things like that for many years, I decided I need to be more influenced by my context. And I changed my way of producing in a radical way. And let me tell you a little bit about my context so you can understand where I come from. Johannesburg is a city that's plagued by a legacy of apartheid. The history of South Africa is known to many due to not only our history, but the contemporary issues of the social ills that exist. You know, the struggles with violence, crime, and many other things. And while there's a very negative picture painted, we are a group of very vocal and active people in South Africa. I'm born and bred there. I know nothing else. This is my home. And these are the people that actually change my life on a daily basis. But these are the people that are remapping the city of Johannesburg and the cities around South Africa. They're relooking, they're rethinking, they're creating new identities for themselves. They're creating new and finding new voices. And this, as an artist, is something quite inspiring when you can walk at any street intersection and realize that local technology actually creates opportunities and business moments for various entrepreneurs. And with technology, I don't necessarily mean our latest high tech. Sometimes the ironing board and a car battery can do the trick. And for me, that is a really inspiring place to be as an artist and practice and think about how art can affect some kind of social change. If we are in the context that we're in, as artists, I really do think that we need to think about our relevance in these places. And thinking about the future, our old technology, our so-called trash, gets recycled somewhere. We know, just like this old synagogue in the middle of Hillbrow in Johannesburg is recycled to become a storage for dead technology, so the technology becomes something else as it moves along. And so through various interactions and interventions in different parts of South Africa, we've started to activate spaces, public spaces, creating a bit of a fun experiment with projections and documenting the transformation of a country. And this has moved into other parts of Africa where, for example, with my company called the Trinity Session, with my collaborator Stephen Hobbs, we've been trying to map other contexts and comparing cities between Johannesburg and, for example, Dakar or Mali, and thinking about communication possibilities between these places. And with those possibilities also come the question of the aspirations. What inspires you? What do you aspire to when you're in this context? And so, as an artist, I had this fundamental shift in my practice. I stood and I said, well, where do I belong in these kind of aspirations and in the realities? Where do I exist in the troubled times and those things that we all talk about, the vision of the future? And in that so-called debate in my head, I started to engage a lot with the people that are looking back in time, both astronomers looking into the stars and archaeologists that are moving things away under the ground and looking back in time that way. And I started to explore something called the vertical gaze. What does it mean to look back in time, both up, using structures of observations, some high-tech, some low-tech, to try and make sense of how we map the stars, how we imagine the depths, how we try to illustrate those spaces that are beyond our imagination. And how do we look back down at Earth? And maybe using Google, or more appropriately for me, using something like Sat, which is South Africa's satellite that's orbiting, sending pictures, or used to send pictures, and who I used to collaborate with. She used to send me pictures of where she's crossing at the moment, and I used to manipulate them and play with them and exhibit them and talk about perspective and understanding our own context. But recently she was hit by some space junk, and now I just know there's a lonely ambassador that I would love to collaborate with floating around. But for me, that's quite interesting, mapping and drawing that perspective and the disruption that comes with who owns the power of these images that we use, who owns our perspective on ourselves, and how in South Africa we've got an incredible space called the cradle of humankind. And this is now working with archaeologists, standing inside the cave, looking out through this portal, as opposed to a lens looking down. What if we imagine ourselves looking in the other direction? So this is me crawling through caves at the cradle of humankind. You might know this place because recently Homo naledi was discovered there, and there are many other very valuable discoveries. And working with the archaeologists to understand what these sites mean to us, how we engage with them, and how, as we kind of trying to articulate them, they become that portal through which we look. They become the moment of now. It's not back in time that way, it's not back in time that way, or that way and that way. It's the moment of the now. And that moment of now is what fascinates me, and how we can take action in transforming our society and realizing how we can connect into the people that are around us. So for example, going back to the city context, creating rockets that talk about aspirations and journeys, transforming buildings to try and talk about what the imaginary rocket factory, which is a fictitious rocket factory that we built in the city of Johannesburg, as a question around what happens if we really did have a rocket factory in Africa. I'll leave it at that. And then working with the builders and the people that are squatting in a lot of these buildings that are in the derelict parts of Johannesburg, and actually exploring the spaces as if they're exploring another planet, to say what is the gold that people are looking for coming to our context, coming to South Africa. And we know migration issues around the world are all about looking for the greener pastures. And to a certain extent, that search and that aspiration to search for something is something that as an artist we deal with on a regular basis. So these types of pictures that you see are interventions and experiments that happen in city centers where there are derelict buildings, and we're exploring them together with the very people that are working in them and living in them, trying to make sense of what it means to be in this context. So because we deal with a lot of social ills in South Africa, a lot of my practice is socially engaged. I try and connect with my neighbors. I try and understand what it means that we've got such a large influx of foreigners. And I'm saying these things because I know they're relevant everywhere else in the world. And I threw in a few slides yesterday quickly to just make reference to something that's just happened in Paris, where the kind of engagement that we've been doing in Johannesburg in dealing with the immigrant communities has been to, for example, allow Senegalese tea ceremonies that welcome people into their neighborhoods to happen in front of us in the darkest, dangerous part of Johannesburg where they live, to invite Johannesburgers back into the city. So these social engagements are also things that we then executed in Paris, in the north of Paris, in the districts where the immigrants are pushed into buildings and kept there until they can be integrated into society, which sometimes is never. And the interaction that we ended up having were really meaningful exchanges between people getting to know their neighbors. And in that sense, recently the Ars Electronica Festival, that might mean something to some of you, which is considered one of the kind of leading electronic arts platforms, commissioned us to do a project in their little town of Linz, where there was no technology. They said, do whatever you like, and actually if you don't have technology, that's fine. Let's think about how we think about the refugee crisis that is currently happening in Europe. And what we symbolically were able to do is convince the mayor of this little town to offer us a street that we could name. And it's a very important street because it links the train station to the city, and this path or street was named by the immigrants and the refugees arriving in Linz, saying this is what the road should be. And it's called the Path of Encounters. And why I'm showing you this, because it's a step away from just playing with technology the way I do usually with projections and all the rest of it, to actually being able to name a road and be proud of having contributed in one symbolic form or another to welcoming gestures within a very complex political situation at the moment. So in light of that, I'd like to just focus on a project for that kind of for me embodies my relationship with science and technology in an interesting way. For many years, as I've said before, I've worked with astronomers and cosmologists and trying to make sense of what's out there, and I was invited to be part of the International Year of Astronomy kind of opening ceremony at the large observatory in Sutherland, a small town in the middle of the desert in South Africa that hosts up to 16 international domes, some from Japan, some from America, etc. And this plateau of 16 domes sits, seen from Google, kind of on a good height. It's an incredible place for observation because of the weather conditions, and it's extremely dark and absolutely amazing to be up there to look at the stars and appreciate the night sky. Seeing the two Magellanic Clouds with your naked eye just by lying down and looking up is just a breathtaking experience. But just at the foot of this hill, you kind of go 10 minutes down, and there is a small town called Sutherland. And Sutherland has got about 4,000 inhabitants, and 500 of them are white, and they own, or did at the time in 2009, own 100% of the economic power. And the rest of the population is kind of the colored population. And so when my wife and I, Bronwyn Lace, kind of took a holiday to explore this and thought, how can we participate in making a meaningful contribution to the link between the scientific pursuit, where so much money is being pumped into the industry of science and into this research, while this community at the foot of the hill is actually dying of hopelessness and darkness. So what happened is the perception of darkness and silence, which is so important to science, is a deterring factor from anyone to invest, first of all, into Sutherland. And secondly, it actually makes people flee. It creates a sense of hopelessness for the youth that's there. So as an artist, we said, well, let's just see how we can play with that relationship. And the first thing we did on the 1st of January 2009 is we launched a kite, just to get people to look up. Very simple act. We thought, what is the fundamentals of astronomy is to look. And so we thought, let's start with that. Suddenly we had 200 kids around us that all wanted to fly kites. And we realized that as artists, our role is about activating a mindset. It's about changing the perception of how we engage with our environment and how the environment responds to us. And so over the months to follow, we engaged with various activations and long-time exposure photography and lights and games and fabric and kites. And we created all of these magical images that you see now that are just engagements with the local community to talk about how we can just play with concepts of science without being too didactic or authoritarian about how it happens. And so while this is an engagement with the youth, what happened very quickly is that the elder communities came to say to us, well, wait a minute, you're doing all this wonderful stuff. I want to go up to that observatory. So we said, not a problem. Let us try and see if we can't create a star bus that takes you up to the observatory every night so you can look at the stars. And so our act just became almost I guess maybe that's the educational part of the observatory, I'm not sure, but we just filled a role that in partnership with the observatory turned into 2009, so it's almost 7 years of engagement and participation that's ongoing. And this engagement has not only transformed the town itself in terms of some of the public artworks or so-called public artworks or projects, it's created support for local businesses. We've actually been able to set up some business entities within the little town. And most importantly, we got other scientists and artists together to contribute to the debate of what it means to have these disciplines meet with each other and actually develop a social cohesion within this seemingly distant relationship of the international observers and the local, quite hungry community. And in those pursuits and in those dialogues, we've generated all types of wonderful, fantastic things. But I want to share with you two highlights. The one is talking about land ownership. The apartheid legacy, and before that already, I mean, I believe the last Bushman was hunted in about 1938, or the last license to issue to hunt Bushman was in 1938. It's a shocking reality that the Khoisan, the Nama, the Bushman was eradicated through the legacy of the settler. And following that, the apartheid system, kind of through the Group Areas Act, eroded people's homes and actually relocated them to other places so they couldn't sustain themselves off the land. And in that act, the issue of land ownership becomes a really important thing in today's society. We see it in the way that people are now living in the small areas where they can't be dependent on anything else but the so-called farmers of the area, but also how then the scientific community has just claimed this land and said, this is now our space for observation. And so the fun thing happened when the elders of the community said, we'd love to be part of that. We want to be in that environment after our engagement. And we went up one afternoon, we stood in a circle, and we created this Sutherland space. We said, this is now the community space. We just claimed it. I think that's the German telescope on that side. Those are two South Africans. And anyway, we just said, this is where we want to be. And the community claimed it, and then it took us 2 years to get ownership of that land. We didn't get the exact location we wanted because they're planning another telescope there. But we got something close by. But the success of actually being able to place the Sutherland Embassy, a community dome that has got nothing else but a geodesic dome to make reference to the largest telescope in the southern hemisphere called SALT, that's on the far end there, and then the Corbel building structure, which is a traditional building style. It's hardly anything but a room that you can go into and claim as your space. It's a 3-meter diameter space, but it's symbolically so important for the community of Sutherland. And with that became a really interesting thing of talking about land ownership and a revealing of the old location that is actually at the foot of this hill that was forcibly removed during the Group Areas Act in South Africa, meant that the elders came out and they said, we used to live here. We had to destroy our houses, and were pushed off our land. But this is actually the land that we lived in. And suddenly this archive came out, this archive of people's lives and their stories and their reference to their own cultural heritage. Kids started to draw with ribbon where the houses used to be, and the elders told the kids that had never known the story before what this was about. And so suddenly the role of artists and scientists coming together about activating stories. And Thomas Klutter, this gentleman on the right who just passed away earlier last year at 107, told us a story that when he was a little boy, he was told by his elders that if he sees a shooting star, he should follow that star. He should pick it up, throw it back into the sky, because the night sky won't always be as beautiful as it is now. And so we took that story, and it inspired so many of the young kids that they started to collect all the little glass shards and crockery and things broken crockery that they found at this forced removed location. And we started to create these night skies, like an installation that Bronwyn built with the participation of the community, and told the story of Thomas and the vision. And this little installation is based in the community, in the science center, in the science education center as part of the observatory. And it's the only reference to the community that lives below in this town. And what it subsequently has done is it's become a tourist destination where people see the installation and say, we want to go to where that place comes, where that is. We want to see the story of the people that lived here. And what is so exciting that now, all this time later, we're unearthing stories about cultural heritage that goes way back, that talks about an eradicated history and talks about a culture of performance and tradition that was always part of a community, that because of the religious, cultural, economic, whatever, forcing them out of their position, they're now revealing some of those stories to us. They're dancing and moving, but they're doing it in relation to the observatory. And that, for us, is a really exciting moment. So I haven't shown you much technology, but what I have taken you on is a little journey on how my relationship as an artist has become about a social conscious practice. And that socially conscious practice in partnership with science and technology has really become something that's gone beyond. And the last few slides I'm showing you here are images from a book and a film that we've just recently published. Africa Meets Africa, an organization, has basically said that they would like to make a book and film about our journey. And it's an educational resource that takes you on a journey of a young boy who comes back to Sutherland from Cape Town. And on coming back to Sutherland, he explores the story of his grandmother who was living there. And he meets archaeologists, astronomers, and artists. And in meeting these different disciplines, he finds out more about his own heritage and culture. And engaging with the scientists and with the artists, he actually makes sense of his own identity and becomes someone that's got a place in this earth. And for me, essentially, that's what it's about, especially with the sprawling square-kilometer array developments and all these new scientific pursuits that are happening on our continent. There's a question of how these scientific spaces tell the story of the people and where the two meet. And so I'm hoping that I could take you on a small journey here now. And for those of you that are interested, I've got the film running outside. It's a 40-minute film, but we've got a 12-minute version. And I've got a copy of the book if you'd like to see it. Thank you for your time.